In today's devotion, I want to touch on one of these topics that we've hit before. It's a question and answer, and we've actually touched on this twice. And I just want to remind us, because this is such an important thing, and it's something that you and I are going to deal with if we're interacting with people outside of the church, in our workplace or our friends or our family. This question so often comes up. It needs to be in the forefront of our mind, and it's this: is believing in God blind faith? Now, the question really can be answered yes and no. I want to lean towards no, and I want you to understand that there are certain things that have to be understood to come to that conclusion. I want to set the mood, though, for answering this question. In other words, there are times when this question is asked with the purpose of confrontation, only for the sake of trying to debate. The question itself is confrontational. I get that. But if a person is just looking to debate something, then you're going to have a little bit of a hard time. Nevertheless, we want to be equipped and talk briefly about how to deal with these thoughts that it seems like believing in God is blind faith. It's really not. Recently, believe it or not, there was a ministry individual that said reason is the guillotine of faith, as if reason is opposite of faith, or reason somehow kills faith. Nothing could be further from the truth. I want to actually encourage you opposite of that our faith, what we believe about God, is a very reasonable faith. It actually makes logical sense and is not illogical in any way, shape, or form. Reason, by the way, is defined by Webster, is a statement offered in explanation or justification, a rational ground or motive. Christ and the apostles never ask us to do anything that's unreasonable or irrational. They don't in any way, shape, or form say, hey, this is irrational, and I want you to do it. Because think about this, the supernatural is actually reasonable. Now, that may be a stretch for you, but consider this. Does the supernatural exist? It's a question. Does it exist? Well, of course it does. There are things that are outside of what we can determine in nature. There are unexplainable things in nature itself. And the only reasonable explanation is that something supernatural affected that. Take, for instance, the origin of the universe, the origin of mankind. And we're not going to do a series today on apologetics, but we are going to talk basically about this. And I want to encourage you, if you want to do a little bit deeper study, you can look at Ravi Zacharias, RZIM Ministries, ICR, Institute for Creation Research. These are all excellent sources for gaining some more ability with apologetics. Nevertheless, atheists, agnostics, Christians alike have to deal with the supernatural. If somebody believes, as many, not all, but many atheists do, that the Big Bang happened and that's how the world came into existence, there had to be something in play for the Big Bang to occur. And if it was a minuscule particle, we still have to have the answer, where did that particle come from? Because one of the laws of science is that everything has a cause. You can't have something without a cause, right? Everything has to begin somewhere or have a reason for why it is. So no matter what, we have to admit that there is a supernatural, something outside of what we see naturally. Now, you and I experience that all the time. Truth is, you and I experience that on a day-to-day basis, maybe without even knowing it. For instance, is your conscience, is it something tangible? Can you describe your soul and your spirit? Can you touch it? Is it a place that you can go to on your body? Absolutely not. Now, some will say that it's just simply neurons firing in your head, and somehow those neurons come together, and the receptors, get certain perceptions and then make judgment calls, and it's like a computer up there, and it's all kind of pre-programmed, and it's all responses. The problem is there's so many characteristics of mankind. It's so intricate. It's not natural. There is absolutely a part of mankind that is supernatural. You are a supernatural being. You are a spirit, right? God has made us in his image. We have a soul, a spirit, and a body, and that in itself is supernatural. The question here, however, is focused on God himself and the existence of God, and is believing in God blind faith? Well, no. We've been dealing with that in Romans. The very first argument that Paul makes in Romans chapter 1 is that we can look in the universe, we can look at what's around us, and see that God must exist. And we can use logic and reason to come to the conclusion that things like polytheism doesn't make sense. There can't be multiple gods, because if you had more than one God, well, then that God wouldn't be supreme, he wouldn't be the greatest, and therefore wouldn't be God. So when mankind worshipped four-footed beings or four-footed animals and began to believe in polytheism, which even today there's cults that are polytheistic if you look at it, because they claim to have multiple gods or that man will become God. But in becoming God, God ceases to be God because, well, who's greater? And if it's a lesser God than another God, is that really God, or is it just a lesser being? You see, it becomes very confusing and very convoluted. Rather, man uses logic and reason. And as we examine the universe, there can only be one God. And he is supreme over all things. He is sovereign over all things. And he alone is God. So it's actually a logical conclusion that God exists. How, for instance, would you explain the things that take place in your heart? The second thing that we talked about there in Romans, the fact that man in his heart, in his mind, the heart is used descriptive of the mind and what we think. In our mind, we know certain things are right and wrong. Well, how does that take place? Well, we're dealing with our soul and our spirit, and it's something that is supernatural within us. And so is that a blind faith? Absolutely. Or absolutely not, I should say, because that's God in us, changing us, transforming us, learning. We are learning things from him. And so, no, that's not a blind faith. It's a very reasonable faith. Of course, if you add in things like the scriptures and looking at how God worked with mankind, how God stepped in supernaturally to mankind's existence, and we read about it historically, it becomes very clear that not only is the supernatural real, but the God of those supernatural things is very real. So in that way of looking at it, no, it's not blind faith. We see God all around us, not just alone in the universe, but think about your own heart. How is it that you are either coming to Christ or have come to Christ for your salvation? God had to change your heart, didn't he? Now, if you've been walking with God for a little bit and you just need a reminder, remember this, that we didn't just all of a sudden stop sinning and of ourselves, did we? No. Romans 6, 7, and 8, I can't wait till we get there. Romans 6 in particular says to know this truth about who we are, to reckon it to be true, and then to yield to that. And all the time, the Spirit of God is coming in and he's changing us and he's transforming us, and that is supernatural. And it can only be explained by God. So there are so many minute reasons and so many large reasons why believing in God is not a blind faith. Again, for more apologetic style things, you could read some of Norm Geisler's works. He's got a great work on systematic theology that he deals with that to the finite depth. And there's other resources, other radio resources, other internet resources that you could look at for apologetics. But I want us to remember as believers that we're not just forgive me, but it's sometimes how the world pictures us as stupid Christians who have this crutch of the Bible and Jesus and God to lean on. That's not it at all. There is no logical explanation outside of God himself. And the beauty for you and I is that as we look at the cross, as we look at Jesus and exercise faith in what he's done, we know that that faith is not ill-placed. It's placed on Jesus to take the place for our sin. And as he rose again, we can walk in newness of life, overcoming death and sin in his strength.